It was a sunny Saturday morning in Pinewood Hills. Pinewood Hills was a small, quiet neighborhood where houses sat close together, and kids rode bikes down the street. The trees were tall, the grass was green, and everything looked peaceful. But it wasn't as peaceful as it seemed. Nope, not at all. See, in Pinewood Hills, everyone knew everyone else's business. If you left your trash can out too long, someone would notice. If your dog barked once, someone would complain. And the person who noticed and complained the most? Her name was Karen Miller. Karen Miller wasn't just any neighbor. She was the boss of the HOA. HOA stands for Homeowners Association. It's a group that makes rules for the neighborhood, like how tall your grass can be or what color your house can be painted. Karen loved being in charge. She walked around with a clipboard and a pen, checking everything. She'd measure your grass with a tiny ruler, and if it was even a little bit too long, like half an inch, she'd write you a mean note. The note would say stuff like, "Cut your grass, or you're in big trouble." She'd stick it on your door and walk away, feeling proud of herself. Everyone in Pinewood Hills was scared of Karen. Well, almost everyone. See, I wasn't scared of her. My name's Jake Carter, and I'm just a regular guy who moved into the neighborhood a few months ago. I didn't care about Karen's rules or her clipboard or her mean notes. I just wanted to live my life and have fun with my best buddy, my pet rabbit, Hopper. Now, let me tell you about Hopper. Hopper wasn't like other rabbits. Most rabbits sit in cages all day, munching on carrots and sleeping. Not Hopper. He was special. He loved to hop around my tiny backyard. His big, floppy ears bounced up and down as he jumped from one spot to another. His fur was white and fluffy, and his little black eyes sparkled like he was always up to something. To me, Hopper was the coolest pet ever. He didn't bark like a dog or scratch like a cat. He just hopped around, happy as can be. I'd sit on my porch with a lemonade and watch him, smiling at how free he looked. But Karen? Oh, she didn't like Hopper one bit. Every time she saw him hopping in my yard, her face would turn all scrunched up and grumpy. She'd march over to my house, her shoes stomping on the sidewalk, and point at Hopper like he was some kind of monster. "That rabbit is a nuisance," she'd yell. "He's ruining our perfect neighborhood." A nuisance means something annoying, but Hopper wasn't annoying to me. He was my friend. I'd just shrug and say, "He's just hopping, Karen. What's the big deal?" But she'd huff and puff and stomp away, muttering about how she'd fix this problem. Karen didn't know it, but I wasn't just some guy with a rabbit. Nope. I had a secret. A big, juicy secret that was hiding right under her nose. She thought she was so smart, walking around with her clipboard, bossing everyone around. She thought she knew everything about Pinewood Hills. But she didn't know about me. She didn't know what I was up to. And soon, very soon, that secret was going to flip her perfect little world upside down. She'd wish she never messed with me or my bunny. Let me take you back to that sunny Saturday morning. The birds were chirping, the sky was blue, and I was sitting on my porch like usual. Hopper was out in the yard, hopping around like he always did. His little feet thumped softly on the grass, and his ears flopped with every jump. I leaned back in my chair, sipping my lemonade, thinking it was going to be a nice, calm day. Boy, was I wrong. Across the street, I saw Karen's front door swing open. She stepped outside, her clipboard in one hand and her phone in the other. Her hair was big and puffy, like she spent hours making it look just right. She wore a bright red shirt and a frown that could scare a bear. She looked around the neighborhood, her eyes scanning every house. Then she saw me. And she saw Hopper. Her frown got even bigger, and she started walking toward my house. I stayed calm. I wasn't going to let her ruin my day. Hopper kept hopping, not even noticing her. But I knew what was coming. Karen was about to start trouble, just like she always did. She stopped at the edge of my yard, her hands on her hips. "Jake Carter," she shouted, loud enough for the whole street to hear. "That rabbit of yours is a problem. He's hopping all over the place, making a mess." I looked at Hopper. He wasn't making a mess. He was just hopping on the grass, minding his own business. "He's not hurting anyone, Karen," I said, keeping my voice nice and steady. "He's just a bunny." But Karen didn't care. She shook her head and waved her clipboard at me. "This is a nice neighborhood," she said. We don't need rabbits hopping around like it's a farm. I'm going to do something about this. I just smiled. She could yell all she wanted. I wasn't worried. See, I knew something she didn't. That secret I mentioned. It was bubbling up inside me, ready to come out. I'd been keeping it quiet for a while, watching Karen, waiting for the right moment. And this sunny Saturday? It was starting to feel like the perfect time to let it loose. Let's rewind a little bit so you understand how we got here. When I moved to Pinewood Hills, I didn't know anyone. I'd just bought my little house, a cute place with a white fence and a small backyard. It was perfect for me and Hopper. The first day I moved in, I let Hopper hop around while I unpacked boxes. The neighbors seemed nice. They waved and smiled as they walked by. But then Karen showed up. It was my second day in the neighborhood. I was carrying a box inside when I heard her voice. "Excuse me," she called out, marching up my driveway. I turned around, and there she was, clipboard in hand, ready to boss me around. "I'm Karen Miller, president of the HOA," she said, like it was the most important job in the world. "I noticed your grass is a little long. You need to cut it by tomorrow, or you'll get a fine." I blinked at her. My grass wasn't even that long. I'd just moved in. But I didn't argue. I nodded and said, "Okay, I'll take care of it." She smirked, wrote something on her clipboard, and walked away. That's when I knew Karen was going to be trouble. A few days later, she came back. This time, it was about Hopper. I'd let him hop in the yard, and she saw him from her house across the street. She stormed over, yelling, "Pets like that need to stay inside. He's going to ruin the neighborhood." I told her, "He's just a rabbit, Karen. He's not hurting anything." But she didn't listen. She wrote another note on her clipboard and told me she'd keep an eye on me. From that day on, Karen watched me like a hawk. Every time Hopper hopped outside, she'd glare at us from her window. Sometimes she'd come over and complain. Other times, she'd just write me notes and leave them on my door. The notes said things like, "Control your rabbit," or "This is your last warning." I didn't let it bother me too much. I'd crumple up the notes and toss them in the trash. Hopper and I kept doing our thing. But here's where it gets interesting. While Karen was busy watching me, I started watching her. Not in a creepy way, just paying attention. See, I'm the kind of guy who notices stuff. Little things. Like how Karen always had people coming to her house late at night. Or how she'd talk on her phone in her backyard, whispering like she didn't want anyone to hear. I didn't know what she was up to at first, but I had a feeling it wasn't good. One day, I was watering my flowers when I overheard her on the phone. She didn't see me behind my fence. She said something like, "Don't worry, they won't find out. Just keep sending the money." Money? What money? I didn't know what she meant, but it stuck in my head. I started keeping track of what I saw, little clues that didn't add up. And that's when my secret started to grow. Back to that sunny Saturday. Karen was standing there, yelling about Hopper again. The neighbors were starting to peek out their windows, wondering what was going on. I could have argued with her, told her to leave us alone. But I didn't. I just sat there, sipping my lemonade, letting her talk. Why? Because I knew something big was coming. Something that would shut her up for good. She didn't know it yet, but I wasn't just Jake Carter, the guy with the rabbit. I was Jake Carter, the guy who'd figured her out. I'd been watching her for weeks, collecting little bits of information. I had a plan, a secret plan that was about to make her wish she'd never called Hopper a nuisance. She thought she was the queen of Pinewood Hills, but her crown was about to fall off. Hopper kept hopping, his little ears bouncing in the breeze. Karen kept yelling, her voice getting louder and louder. "I'm going to call the police," she shouted. "This rabbit nonsense has gone on long enough." I raised an eyebrow. The police? For a bunny? That was the silliest thing I'd ever heard. But I didn't stop her. I wanted to see what she'd do. She pulled out her phone and started dialing. "Hello, 911, she said, her voice all dramatic. "Yes, I need help. There's a dangerous animal loose in my neighborhood." Dangerous? I almost laughed out loud. Hopper wasn't dangerous. He was a fluffy bunny who liked carrots and naps. But Karen kept going, telling the operator all about how Hopper was ruining everything. I leaned back in my chair, watching her. She thought she was winning. She thought she'd scare me into locking Hopper up. But she didn't know the truth. She didn't know that I had something up my sleeve, something that would turn this whole day into a big surprise. Not just for her, but for everyone in Pinewood Hills. So, that's where we start, friends. A sunny day, a hopping rabbit, and a grumpy Karen who didn't see what was coming. Before we go any further, I've got a question for you, something fun to think about. What's the silliest thing a neighbor's ever complained about to you? Maybe they didn't like your bike in the driveway or your music being too loud. Drop your answer in the comments below. I want to hear your wildest stories. And if you're liking this tale so far, give it a thumbs up and tell me if you've got a pet as cool as Hopper. Let's see who's got the best neighbor drama. It all started one afternoon in Pinewood Hills. The sun was shining, the air was warm, and I was sitting on my porch like I usually did. My pet rabbit, Hopper, was out in the yard. He was nibbling on some clover, those little green plants that grow in the grass. His big ears flopped as he chewed, and his fluffy white fur looked soft in the sunlight. To me, it was a perfect day. But then Karen Miller showed up, and everything changed. Karen lived across the street. She was the HOA president, which means she made rules for the neighborhood. She loved telling people what to do. If your grass was too long, she'd complain. If your trash can was out late, she'd write you a note. Everyone tried to stay out of her way, but not me. I'm Jake Carter, and I didn't care about her rules. I just wanted to hang out with Hopper and enjoy my day. Too bad Karen had other plans. That afternoon, I heard her before I saw her. Her shoes made loud stomping noises on the sidewalk. Thump, thump, thump. I looked up, and there she was, marching toward my house. Her face was redder than a ripe tomato. Her eyes were squinting, and her mouth was twisted into a big, angry frown. She stopped right at the edge of my yard and pointed at Hopper. "That rabbit of yours is ruining the neighborhood," she yelled. Her voice was so loud, I bet the birds in the trees heard her. I looked at Hopper. He was still nibbling his clover, not bothering anyone. His little nose twitched as he ate. Ruining the neighborhood? That didn't make sense. "He's just eating some plants, Karen," I said, keeping my voice nice and calm. "He's not hurting anything." But Karen didn't like that answer. She shook her head so fast her puffy hair bounced. "No," she shouted. "He's hopping all over. It's a mess. I'm calling the cops if you don't lock that thing up." "The cops? For a rabbit?" I couldn't believe what I was hearing. I shrugged my shoulders and said, "He's just a bunny, Karen. Relax." I thought maybe she'd see how silly she was being. Hopper wasn't a wild tiger or a loud dog. He was a fluffy little rabbit who liked to hop around my tiny yard. But Karen didn't relax. Not even a little bit. Her face got even redder, and her eyes got all narrow, like she was planning something mean. She reached into her pocket and pulled out her phone. It was one of those big, shiny phones with a bright screen. She held it up and started pressing buttons. "I'm doing it," she said, her voice sharp and loud. "I'm calling 911 right now." I watched her, still sitting on my porch, my lemonade glass in my hand. She put the phone to her ear and started talking. "Hello, 911? Yes, I need help. There's a dangerous animal on the loose in my neighborhood." "Dangerous?" I almost laughed out loud. Almost. Hopper wasn't dangerous. He was the sweetest bunny ever. He didn't bite or scratch or growl. He just hopped and ate and slept. But Karen kept going, her voice getting louder and louder. "It's a rabbit," she screeched into the phone. "It's ruining everything. You need to send someone quick." I shook my head. This was the most ridiculous thing I'd ever heard. A rabbit on the loose. It sounded like a funny story, not a real problem. I stayed calm, though. I didn't yell back or get mad. I just watched her, sipping my lemonade. The neighbors started peeking out their windows. I could see curtains moving and heads popping up. They wanted to know what all the yelling was about. Karen didn't care. She kept talking on the phone, waving her free hand in the air. "Yes, it's at Jake Carter's house," she said. "He won't control it. Hurry." When she hung up, She turned to me with a big, smug smile. "The cops are coming," she said, crossing her arms. "You'll see. They'll take that rabbit away, and this neighborhood will be perfect again." I didn't say anything. I just looked at her, then at Hopper. He'd finished his clover and was hopping over to a sunny spot in the grass. He flopped down and stretched out, like he didn't have a care in the world. I smiled at him. Karen could call the cops all she wanted. I wasn't worried. Why wasn't I worried? Well, here's the thing: deep down, I knew something Karen didn't. Something big. See, I'd been watching her for weeks. Not in a sneaky, hide-in-the-bushes way. Just paying attention. I'm the kind of guy who notices stuff. Little things that other people miss. And with Karen, there were a lot of little things that didn't add up. Let me tell you what I'd seen. It started a few weeks ago. I was outside one night, taking out the trash, when I noticed something weird. A car pulled up to Karen's house. It was late, like after bedtime late. The street was dark, and most people were asleep. But this car parked right in front of her place. A man got out, looked around, and walked up to her door. Karen opened it fast, like she'd been waiting for him. They talked for a minute, and then she handed him something. It looked like a little bag. He gave her something back, maybe money. I couldn't tell for sure. Then he left, and she shut the door quick. That wasn't the only time. A few nights later, I saw another car. Different car, different person. Same thing happened. Karen came out, they traded stuff, and she went back inside. I started wondering, what was she doing? Why did people keep coming to her house at night? It was strange. And then there were the phone calls. One day, I was in my backyard, pulling weeds. Karen was in her yard, talking on her phone. She didn't know I was there. I stayed quiet and listened. She said stuff like, "No one knows. Just keep it coming. And then, I'll take care of it. They won't find out." Find out what? I didn't know yet, but it sounded sneaky. Like she was hiding something. I started keeping track of everything I saw: late night visitors, weird phone calls, the way she acted all bossy during the day but sneaky at night. Back to that afternoon. Karen stood there, her phone still in her hand, glaring at me. "You're in trouble now, Jake," she said. "The cops will fix this." I didn't say a word. I just kept sipping my lemonade, watching her. She thought she'd won. She thought calling the cops would scare me. But she didn't know I'd been watching her. She didn't know I'd seen her secrets. And soon, very soon, she'd wish she'd never messed with me or Hopper. The air felt thick, like something big was about to happen. Hopper kept hopping, his little feet thumping on the grass. Karen kept glaring, her red face shining in the sun. The neighbors kept watching, whispering to each other behind their curtains. I stayed calm, but inside, I was ready. Ready for what? You'll see. Something was coming, and Karen wasn't going to like it. Let's rewind a bit so you get the full picture. Karen had been picking on me ever since I moved in. The first time was about my grass. She said it was too long, even though I'd just moved in. Then it was about Hopper. She hated seeing him hop around. She'd come over all the time, yelling about how he didn't belong in a nice neighborhood. I'd tell her he was just a bunny, but she never listened. She'd write notes, shake her clipboard, and stomp away. It was like a game to her, bossing me around, trying to make me follow her rules. But I didn't play her game. I let Hopper hop whenever he wanted. I cut my grass when I felt like it, not when she told me to. And every time she yelled, I just smiled and shrugged. It made her so mad. Her face would turn red, and she'd huff and puff like a dragon. I think that's why she hated me so much. I didn't do what she wanted. I didn't bow down to her like everyone else. That afternoon, though, she took it to a whole new level. Calling the cops on Hopper? That was crazy. I mean, who calls 911 over a rabbit? It was so silly, I wanted to laugh. But I didn't. I kept my cool. Because I knew something she didn't. I knew she wasn't as perfect as she pretended to be. She acted like the queen of Pinewood Hills, but I'd seen the cracks in her crown. Those late-night visitors, those sneaky phone calls, they were clues. Clues to something big. As Karen stood there, waiting for the cops, I thought about everything I'd seen. The man with the bag. The whispers on the phone. The way she acted so mean during the day but so secret at night. It didn't add up. What was she hiding? I didn't have all the answers yet, but I had enough. Enough to know she wasn't going to win this fight. Not today. Not with me. The tension was building. I could feel it. Karen could too, even if she didn't know why. She kept looking down the street, waiting for the police to show up. She thought they'd come for Hopper. She thought they'd tell me to lock him up. She thought she'd get her way, like always. But I had a feeling things weren't going to go her way this time. I had a feeling she was about to get a big surprise. Hopper hopped over to me and sat by my chair. I reached down and scratched his ears. He didn't know what was going on. He didn't care about Karen or her phone call. He was just happy to be with me. I looked at him and smiled. "Don't worry, buddy," I whispered. "She's not going to win this one." And deep down, I knew I was right. Karen paced back and forth, her shoes clicking on the sidewalk. She kept checking her phone, then looking down the street. "They'll be here soon," she said, more to herself than to me. "You'll see, Jake. You can't ignore the rules forever." I didn't answer. I didn't need to. I just watched her, waiting. Waiting for what? Oh, you'll find out soon enough. The neighborhood was quiet now, except for Karen's pacing. The birds had stopped chirping. The wind had slowed down. It was like everything was holding its breath, waiting to see what would happen next. I leaned back in my chair, my lemonade almost gone. Karen thought she had me cornered. She thought she was in control. But she didn't know what I knew. She didn't see what I'd seen. And that was her big mistake. So there we were, Karen yelling, Hopper hopping, and me sitting there with a secret. The cops were on their way, or so she thought. The neighbors were watching, wondering what would happen. And me? I was ready. Ready to turn this whole thing around. Karen had no idea what was coming. She'd messed with the wrong guy and the wrong bunny. Soon, she'd find out just how wrong she was. The next day was Sunday. The sun was up, the sky was clear, and Pinewood Hills looked calm and quiet. I woke up early, made some toast, and decided it was a good day for Hopper to play outside. Hopper's my pet rabbit, the fluffiest little guy you've ever seen. He's white with big, floppy ears and a twitchy nose. I opened the back door, and he hopped right out into my tiny yard. Thump, 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 his little feet hit the grass, and he started bouncing around like he owned the place. I grabbed a glass of orange juice and sat on my porch to watch him. I wanted to see what would happen. Especially with Karen around. Karen Miller was my neighbor across the street. She was the HOA president, the boss of the neighborhood rules. She hated Hopper. She thought he was a problem because he hopped in my yard. Yesterday, she'd called 911, saying he was a dangerous animal. Can you believe that? A rabbit, dangerous. It was so silly. She said the cops were coming to take him away. I didn't think they'd really come for a bunny, but I let Hopper hop again today anyway. Just to see what Karen would do. I had a feeling she wouldn't let it go. Sure enough, it didn't take long. I'd only been sitting there a few minutes when I heard her stomp, stomp, stomp. Her shoes were loud on the sidewalk. I looked up, and there she was, marching toward my house again. Her arms were waving like a windmill, spinning fast in the air. Her face was red, her eyes were big, and her mouth was open, ready to yell. She stopped at the edge of my yard and pointed at Hopper. "I warned you, Jake," she shouted. "I told you yesterday. The cops are on their way." Hopper didn't even look at her. He was too busy hopping over to a patch of flowers, sniffing them with his little nose. I leaned back in my chair and smirked. A smirk is like a small, sneaky smile. "Good luck with that," I said, keeping my voice nice and calm. Karen's eyes got even bigger. "What's that supposed to mean?" she snapped. I didn't answer. I just took a sip of my orange juice and watched her. She didn't know it, but I wasn't scared of her or her cops. I had a trick up my sleeve, a secret she'd never guess. See, while Karen was busy yelling about Hopper yesterday, I'd done something sneaky of my own. After she called 911 and stormed off, I picked up my phone. I didn't call the police, though. Nope. I called someone else, my friend Mike. Mike works at the police station. He's not a cop, but he helps them with paperwork and stuff. I'd been telling Mike about Karen for weeks. About her late night visitors. About her weird phone calls. About how she acted all bossy but sneaky too. Mike said he'd look into it, check if she was up to something bad. And last night, I'd called him again. I told him about Karen calling 911 on Hopper. He laughed and said, "Don't worry, Jake. I've got people watching her. We'll figure this out." So when Karen said the cops were coming, I wasn't worried. I knew something she didn't. Karen didn't stop yelling. She kept going, her voice loud enough to wake up the whole street. "That rabbit is a nuisance," she said. "He's hopping everywhere, ruining our nice neighborhood. I told you to lock him up, Jake. Now the cops will make you." She waved her arms some more, like she was trying to scare Hopper away. But Hopper didn't care. He just kept sniffing the flowers, his ears flopping with every hop. I watched her rant, and I stayed quiet. I didn't need to argue. I just let her talk, waiting for what would happen next. While she was yelling, I noticed something odd. Something that made my heart beat a little faster. Down the street, a police car was coming. It was moving slow, its lights off, but I could see the blue and white colors shining in the sun. The car rolled closer and closer, quiet as can be. Karen didn't see it at first. She was too busy shouting at me. "You think you're so smart, Jake," she said. "You think you can ignore my rules. Well, you'll see. The cops will fix this." Then she turned her head and saw the car. Her face changed fast. Her angry frown turned into a big, happy grin. She looked like she'd just won a prize like the lottery or a giant candy bar. She clapped her hands together and pointed at the police car. "See," she said, her voice all smug. "They're here. They're here for your stupid rabbit." She crossed her arms and stared at me, waiting for me to get scared or mad. She thought she'd won. She thought the cops were coming to take Hopper away, just like she wanted. But I didn't get scared. I didn't get mad. I stayed quiet, watching the car. I put my orange juice down on the table next to me and leaned forward a little. The police car kept coming, slow and steady. It rolled past my house, and I saw two cops inside. They wore dark uniforms and sunglasses, and they didn't even glance my way. Not once. They didn't look at Hopper hopping in the yard. They didn't look at me sitting on the porch. They just kept driving right past my house. Karen's grin got even bigger. "Here they come," she said, practically jumping up and down. "Say goodbye to that rabbit, Jake." But then something funny happened. The police car didn't stop at my house. It didn't pull into my driveway or park in front of my yard. Nope. It kept going, right past me, and stopped in front of her house. Right there, across the street, in front of Karen's perfect little home with its perfect flowers and perfect paint. Karen's grin started to fade. Her mouth opened a little, like she wasn't sure what was happening. She blinked fast, her eyes darting from the car to me and back to the car. What's going on?" she said, her voice quieter now. I didn't say anything. I just watched. The cops turned off the engine and opened their doors. They stepped out, slow and calm, their boots hitting the pavement with a soft thud. They didn't come toward my yard. They didn't look at Hopper. They walked straight up to Karen's front porch. Karen's face changed again. Her big grin was gone now. She looked confused, like she'd lost something and couldn't find it. "Wait a minute," she said, her voice getting loud again. "They're supposed to be here for you. For that rabbit." She pointed at Hopper, who was now lying in the grass, chewing on a leaf. I smirked again and shrugged. "Guess not," I said, keeping it short and simple. Karen's eyes got wide. She didn't know what to think. She didn't know what was happening. But I did. Oh, I knew exactly what was going on. See, those cops weren't here for Hopper. They weren't here because of Karen's silly 911 call about a dangerous animal. They were here for something else, something bigger. Something tied to all those sneaky things I'd seen Karen doing. The late night visitors with their little bags. The phone calls where she whispered about money. The way she acted like she owned the neighborhood but hid stuff when no one was looking. I told Mike about it all, and he told the cops. They'd been watching her too, not me, not Hopper, but her. And now they were at her house. Karen started to panic. She dropped her arms and took a step back. "This is a mistake," she said, her voice shaky. "I called them. They're here for you, Jake." But the cops didn't turn around. They didn't even look at her yet. One of them knocked on her door, boom, 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 while the other stood there, hands on his hips. No one answered the door, because Karen was standing right there in my yard. She spun around and stared at them, then at me. "What did you do?" she asked, her voice low and wobbly. I didn't answer right away. I picked up my orange juice and took another sip, letting her squirm. "Me," I said finally. "I didn't do anything." "Maybe you should ask yourself that, Karen." Her mouth opened, then closed, like a fish out of water. She didn't know what to say. She didn't know what I knew. But she was starting to figure out that something was wrong, very wrong for her. Let's back up a bit so you see how we got here. After Karen called 911 yesterday, I wasn't mad. I wasn't scared. I was curious. I wanted to know if she'd really get the cops to come for Hopper. It seemed so crazy. So I called Mike last night and told him what happened. "She called the police on my rabbit," I said, laughing a little. Mike laughed too. "That's nuts," he said. "But don't worry. We've been checking on her. She's been doing some shady stuff. We'll handle it." Shady means sneaky and bad, like hiding something you shouldn't. Mike wouldn't tell me everything yet, but he said enough. Enough to make me think Karen was in big trouble. So today, when I let Hopper hop around, I wasn't just relaxing. I was testing her. I wanted to see if she'd keep pushing, keep yelling, keep calling me out. And she did. She came right back, waving her arms, saying the cops were coming. But she didn't know I'd already made my move. She didn't know Mike and the police had been watching her for weeks. She didn't know they'd found something she couldn't talk her way out of. The cops stood at her door now, waiting. Karen took a few steps toward her house, then stopped. She looked back at me, her face all twisted up. "This isn't over," she said, trying to sound tough. But her voice was wobbly, and her hands were shaking. I could tell she was scared. She didn't understand why the cops were at her house instead of mine. She didn't get it yet. But she would soon. Hopper hopped over to me and sat by my chair. I reached down and patted his soft fur. He didn't know what was happening either, but he was happy just being with me. I looked at Karen and smiled, not a big smile, just a little one. "Maybe you should go see what they want," I said, nodding toward the cops. Her eyes got huge, and she turned around fast, walking toward her house like she didn't want to but had to. The tension was thick now, like a heavy blanket over the whole street. The neighbors were watching again, curtains moving, heads peeking out. They'd heard Karen yelling, and now they saw the police car. They wanted to know what was going on too. I stayed on my porch, calm and quiet, watching it all. Karen thought she'd called the cops on me. She thought she was in charge. But she was wrong. Something big was about to happen, and she was right in the middle of it. What was my secret? What did I tell Mike? Why were the cops really here? Oh, you'll find out soon. It's all coming together, piece by piece. Karen's smug grin was gone, and her perfect little Karen was walking toward her house now, her step slow and shaky. She didn't look so tough anymore. Her arms weren't waving like a windmill. Her voice wasn't loud and bossy. She looked like someone who just dropped their ice cream cone on the ground, confused and a little scared. The two cops stood on her porch, waiting for her. One of them had his hand on the door, like he was about to knock again. The other was looking around, his sunglasses hiding his eyes. They didn't seem in a hurry, but they didn't seem friendly either. I stayed on my porch, petting Hopper. His soft fur felt nice under my fingers, and his little nose twitched as he sniffed the air. He didn't know what was happening, and that was okay. I liked that he was calm while everything else was getting wild. I watched Karen get closer to her house. She stopped a few feet from the cops and said, hello. Can I help you?" Her voice wasn't yelling now. It was small and wobbly, like she wasn't sure what to say. The cop with the sunglasses turned to her. "Are you Karen Miller?" he asked. His voice was deep and serious, like a teacher asking if you did your homework. Karen nodded fast. "Yes, that's me," she said. But I called you. I called about him." She turned and pointed at me, her finger shaking a little. "He's got a rabbit that's ruining the neighborhood. That's why you're here, right?" The cop didn't even look at me. He shook his head slow. "No, ma'am," he said. "We're not here about a rabbit." Karen's mouth dropped open. She looked like she'd just heard the silliest thing ever, but she wasn't laughing. "What?" she said, her voice getting louder again. "Not about the rabbit? Then why are you here? This is my house." The other cop stepped forward. He was holding a little notebook, like the kind you use to write grocery lists. He flipped it open and started reading. "Karen Miller," he said, "we've got some questions for you. About some stuff that's been going on around here." Karen's eyes got big, really big, like saucers. She took a step back and shook her head. "Questions? What questions? I didn't do anything. I'm the HOA president. I keep this neighborhood perfect." I smirked again, but I didn't say anything. I just kept petting Hopper and watching. The cops didn't care about her yelling. They didn't care about her being the HOA president. They were here for something else, something I'd been hinting at. See, I'd been watching Karen for weeks, and I told my friend Mike everything. Mike worked at the police station, and he'd been helping the cops figure out what Karen was up to. Those late-night visitors? Those sneaky phone calls? They weren't just weird, they were bad. And now the cops were here to ask her about it? Karen kept talking, her voice getting faster. "This is a mistake," she said. "I called you yesterday. I told you about that rabbit. You're supposed to be at his house, not mine." She pointed at me again, but the cop still didn't look my way. The one with the notebook shook his head. "We got your call," he said, "but that's not why we're here. We've been looking into some other things. Things you might know about." Karen's face went pale. Pale means it lost all its color, like a ghost. She looked at the cops, then at me, then back at the cops. "Other things," she said, her voice squeaky now. "What other things? I don't know what you're talking about." But I could tell she was lying. Her hands were twisting together, and her eyes were darting around, like she was looking for a way to run. She was nervous, really nervous, and I knew why. Let's go back a little so you understand what's happening. For weeks, I'd been noticing stuff about Karen. It started small. One night, I saw a car pull up to her house super late, like midnight late. A guy got out, and Karen met him at the door. They traded something, maybe a bag, maybe money, and then he left. I thought it was weird, but I didn't say anything. Then it happened again. And again. Different cars, different people, always late at night. I started paying attention. Then there were the phone calls. One day, I was in my backyard, watering my plants, when I heard her talking. She was on her phone, whispering like she didn't want anyone to hear. "Keep it quiet," she said. "No one can know. Just send the money." Money? What money? I didn't know yet, but it stuck in my head. I started writing stuff down when the cars came, what she said on the phone, anything that seemed sneaky. I told Mike about it, and he said, "Sounds like she's up to no good. I'll check it out." Yesterday, when Karen called 911 about Hopper, I called Mike after she left. "She's trying to get the cops to take my rabbit," I told him. He laughed and said, "That's crazy. But don't worry. We've been watching her. She's been doing some bad stuff, stealing money from the neighborhood, faking rules to get cash. We've got proof." Proof means evidence, like clues that show you did something wrong. Mike wouldn't tell me everything, but he said the cops were ready to move. And now, here they were. Back to Sunday. Karen was standing in front of the cops, her hands shaking. "I don't know what you mean," she said again. "I'm a good person. I make rules to keep this place nice." The cop with the sunglasses tilted his head. "We'll see about that," he said. "We've got reports of money going missing." "HOA money? People say you've been taking it." Karen's mouth opened, but no words came out. She looked like she'd been caught with her hand in a cookie jar. I stayed quiet on my porch, but inside, I was smiling big. HOA money? That made sense. The HOA collected cash from everyone in the neighborhood like a fee to keep things pretty. Karen was in charge of it. If she was taking it for herself, that was stealing. Big time stealing. And I'd seen the clues, the late night trades, the whispers about money. I told Mike, and he told the cops. Now they were here to catch her. Karen shook her head fast. That's not true, she said. I didn't take anything. Who said that? Who's lying about me? The cop with the notebook looked at her. We've got witnesses, he said. And records. Bank stuff. It doesn't look good for you. Witnesses are people who saw something. Records are papers that show where money goes. Karen's face went even paler. She didn't know what to say. She turned to me again, her eyes all wild. You, she shouted. You did this. You set me up. I raised my hands, like I was innocent. Me. I said. I didn't do anything. I just let Hopper hop. She glared at me, her fists clenched. You're lying, she said. You've been against me since you moved in. This is your fault. But the cops didn't care. They weren't here for me. They were here for her. The cop with the sunglasses stepped closer to her. Ma'am, we need you to come with us, he said. We've got more questions. At the station. Karen's eyes got huge. The station, she squeaked. Like, the police station? No. I'm not going anywhere. I didn't do anything wrong. But the cops didn't look like they were asking. They looked like they meant it. Karen took a step back, her hands up. This is crazy, she said. I called you about that rabbit. You're supposed to be arresting him. She pointed at me again, but the cops just shook their heads. We're not here for a rabbit, the notebook cop said. We're here for you. Let's go. Karen's mouth dropped open again. She looked like she wanted to run, but there was nowhere to go. I watched it all from my porch, petting Hopper. The neighbors were still peeking out their windows, whispering to each other. Some of them stepped outside now, standing on their lawns to get a better look. They'd heard Karen yelling about Hopper, but now they saw the cops at her house. They were starting to figure it out, something big was happening, and it wasn't about my bunny. Karen kept arguing. This is a mistake, she said. I'm the victim here. That rabbit's the problem. But the cops weren't listening. They moved closer to her, like they were ready to grab her if she tried to bolt. Ma'am, you need to calm down, the sunglasses cop said. We can do this easy, or we can do it hard. Your choice. Karen's hands shook more. She looked around, like she was hoping someone would help her. But no one did. I leaned back in my chair, feeling pretty good. Karen thought she could boss me around. She thought she could call the cops on Hopper and win. But she didn't know I'd been watching her. She didn't know I'd told Mike. She didn't know the cops had been watching her too. And now, her big plan was falling apart, right in front of everyone. Let's think about this for a second. Karen had been running the HOA for years. She made rules, collected money, told everyone what to do. She acted like she was perfect, like she never did anything wrong. But I'd seen the truth. Those late-night visitors weren't just friends. Those phone calls weren't just chats. She was taking money, stealing it from the neighborhood and hiding it. I didn't know all the details yet, but Mike did. And the cops did. That's why they were here. Karen kept talking, her voice loud but shaky. You've got the wrong person, she said. I'm not a thief. I'm a good neighbor. The cop with the notebook flipped a page. We've got proof, he said. Checks with your name. Money going to your bank. People saw you. Karen's face twisted up. Lies, she shouted. All lies. Who saw me? Tell me. But the cops didn't answer. They just stood there, waiting for her to stop. I thought about all the times she'd yelled at me. About my grass being too long. About Hopper hopping. She'd written me notes, glared at me from her window, called me a troublemaker. But the real troublemaker was her. She'd been sneaking around, breaking rules, taking stuff that wasn't hers. And now, Everyone was about to find out. The cop with the sunglasses put his hand on her arm. "Let's go, ma'am," he said. Karen pulled away fast. "No," she yelled. "You can't do this. I'm calling my lawyer." She reached for her phone, but her hands were shaking so bad she almost dropped it. The cop shook his head. "You can call from the station," he said. "Right now, you're coming with us." Karen looked around again, her eyes wild. The neighbors were all outside now, watching. Some of them whispered to each other. Some of them smiled, like they were happy to see her in trouble. I didn't blame them. Karen had been mean to everyone, writing notes, making rules, acting like she owned the street. Now, they were seeing her for what she really was. She turned to me one last time. "This isn't over, Jake," she shouted. "You'll pay for this." I just shrugged and scratched Hopper's ears. "Have a nice day, Karen," I said, calm as can be. Her face went red again, not tomato red, but angry, scared red. She didn't know what to do. She didn't know how to get out of this. The cops took her arms, now one on each side. "Time to go," the notebook cop said. Karen tried to pull away, but they held on tight. "Let me go," she yelled. "This is wrong. I didn't do anything." But they started walking her toward the car. Her feet dragged a little, like she didn't want to move. The neighbors watched, some of them taking pictures with their phones. This was big news in Pinewood Hills. I stayed on my porch, Hopper by my side. The cops opened the car door and helped Karen inside. She kept yelling, even as they shut the door. "You'll be sorry," she shouted through the window. "All of you." But no one listened. The cops got in the front, started the engine, and drove off. The car rolled down the street, slow and steady, until it was out of sight. The street went quiet. The neighbors looked at each other, then at me. Some of them waved, like they were saying thanks. I waved back, smiling a little. Hopper hopped around my feet, happy as ever. He didn't know what just happened, but I did. Karen was gone for now, at least. And her secrets? They weren't secrets anymore. But wait, there's more to this. See, I didn't just call Mike for fun. I'd been watching Karen because I had to. She'd been making my life hard since I moved in. The notes, the yelling, the rules, it was too much. I wanted to know why she was so mean. And when I saw those late night cars, I got curious. I started keeping a list, dates, times, little things she did. I showed it to Mike, and he said, "This is serious, Jake. She might be breaking the law." He was right. Karen wasn't just bossy. She was sneaky. She'd been taking HOA money, cash we all paid, to fix the streets or plant flowers, and keeping it for herself. Mike found out she'd been writing fake fines, telling people they owed money for silly things. Then she'd take that money and hide it. The cops had been watching her for a while, waiting for the right time. And my call about Hopper? It gave them the push they needed. So when Karen called 911 yesterday, she thought she was smart. She thought she'd scare me into locking Hopper up. But she didn't know I'd already talked to Mike. She didn't know the cops were coming for her, not me. She didn't know her own trick would backfire, turn around and bite her instead. The neighbors started walking back to their houses now. Some of them stopped to talk, their voices low and excited. "Did you see that?" one lady said. "Karen's in trouble." A man nodded. "About time," he said. "She's been mean forever." I listened, petting Hopper, feeling good. Karen thought she could win, but she'd lost big time. I looked down at Hopper and grinned. "We did it, buddy," I whispered. He twitched his nose and hopped away, back to his flowers. The day was still sunny, the air still warm. But now, it felt different. Lighter. Like a big weight was gone. Karen was gone, and her secrets were out. Well, some of them. There was more to come, I could feel it. This wasn't the end. Not yet. What did the cops have on her? What would happen next? Oh, you'll see. The story's getting bigger, and Karen's in deeper than she knows. She thought she could mess with me and Hopper, but she picked the wrong fight. And now, the whole neighborhood was watching her fall. World was starting to crack. She'd messed with me and Hopper one too many times. And now, Now she was about to see what happens when you pick the wrong fight. It was Sunday afternoon in Pinewood Hills, and things were getting wild. I was still sitting on my porch, petting my rabbit, Hopper. He was hopping around my feet, his fluffy white fur shining in the sun. Across the street, a police car was parked right in front of Karen Miller's house. Karen was the HOA president, the lady who made rules and yelled at everyone. She'd been yelling at me all weekend about Hopper, saying he was ruining the neighborhood. She even called 911 yesterday, telling them he was a dangerous animal. A rabbit. Dangerous. It was so silly, but she was serious. And now, the cops were here. The two officers stepped out of their car. Their radios were crackling, making little buzzing sounds like walkie-talkies. They wore dark uniforms and shiny badges, and they looked tough. They didn't stop to look around or wave at anyone. They walked straight up to Karen's porch, their boots thumping on the ground. Karen was standing in my yard, still mad at me. She'd just finished yelling about how the cops were coming for Hopper. But when she saw them go to her house, her face changed. She didn't look so sure anymore. One of the cops, the tall one with short hair, stopped at her door and turned to her. "Karen Miller," he asked. His voice was sharp, like a teacher calling your name when you're in trouble. Karen blinked fast, like she wasn't ready for this. Yes, that's me," she said, her words stumbling out. She took a step toward them, then pointed at me with a shaky finger. But I called about him." She jabbed her finger my way, like I was the bad guy. "He's got that rabbit. That's why you're here, right?" The cop didn't even turn his head. He didn't look at me or Hopper. He just stared at Karen, his face serious. "Ma'am," he said, "we're not here for a rabbit. We're here for you." The words hung in the air like a big thunderclap. Karen's jaw dropped, her mouth fell open so wide, I could see her teeth. She looked like she'd just seen a ghost. Her eyes got huge, and her hands started shaking. "What?" she said, her voice all squeaky. "Me? What do you mean, me?" My jaw didn't drop. I didn't gasp or jump up. I just sat there, petting Hopper, watching it all happen. See, I'd been waiting for this moment. I wasn't surprised, not one bit. For weeks, I'd been putting the pieces together, like a puzzle. Karen wasn't just a nosy lady with a clipboard. She wasn't just mean and bossy. She was doing something bad, really bad. And I'd figured it out. Now, the cops were here to prove it. Karen took a step back, her shoes scuffing the grass. "This is crazy," she said, her voice loud again. "I didn't do anything. I called you. I told you about that rabbit." She kept pointing at me, like if she pointed hard enough, the cops would change their minds. But they didn't move. The tall cop shook his head. "We know about your call," he said. "But that's not why we're here. We've got bigger problems to talk about." Karen's face went white like all the color drained out of it. "Bigger problems," she said, her voice wobbly. "What problems? I'm a good person. I run the HOA. I make this neighborhood nice." She waved her arms around, like she was trying to show how perfect everything was. But the cops didn't care. The other officer, the one with a little beard, stepped forward. He was holding handcuffs, shiny and silver, dangling from his hand. "Karen Miller," he said, "you're under arrest for fraud and theft. Fraud means lying to trick people. Theft means stealing stuff that isn't yours." When the cop said those words, Karen shrieked like a scream so loud it hurt my ears. "This is a mistake," she yelled. "I didn't steal anything. You've got the wrong person." She shook her head so fast her hair bounced all over. But the cops didn't stop. The tall one grabbed her arm, gentle but firm, and the bearded one started putting the handcuffs on her wrists. Click, click, they snapped shut, locking her hands together. I watched it all, still sitting on my porch. Hopper hopped over to a sunny spot and flopped down, like he didn't have a worry in the world. I smiled a little, not a big grin, just a small one. See, I knew this was coming. I'd been waiting for weeks. Karen thought she could bully everyone, yell at me, write mean notes, make silly rules. But she didn't know I'd been watching her. She didn't know I'd found out her secret. And now, it was all coming out. Let's back up so you see how this happened. My name's Jake Carter, and I moved to Pinewood Hills a few months ago. It's a quiet little neighborhood with small houses and green lawns. I liked it because it was peaceful, at least, it was supposed to be. But Karen made it hard. She was the HOA president, and she loved being in charge. She'd measure your grass with a ruler and leave notes if it was too long. She'd knock on your door if your trash can was out late. Everyone was scared of her, everyone but me. I had a pet rabbit named Hopper. He's the best bunny ever, white and fluffy with big ears that flop when he hops. I let him play in my tiny backyard every day. It made me happy to watch him bounce around, nibbling clover and sniffing flowers. But Karen hated him. She'd storm over and yell, "That rabbit's a nuisance. He's ruining our perfect neighborhood." I'd tell her, "He's just hopping, Karen. Relax." But she never relaxed. She'd glare at me, write notes, and stomp away. A few weeks ago, things got weird. I started noticing stuff about Karen. One night, I was taking out my trash when I saw a car pull up to her house. It was super late, like after bedtime. A man got out, and Karen met him at the door. They traded something, maybe a bag, maybe money, and then he left. I thought it was strange, but I didn't say anything. Then it happened again. And again. Different cars, different people, always at night. I started watching closer. Then I heard her on the phone. I was in my backyard, pulling weeds, when she started talking. She didn't see me. She whispered, "No one knows. Just keep sending the money." Money? What money? It didn't make sense. Why was she talking about money in secret? I started writing things down when the cars came, what she said, anything sneaky. I had a feeling she was up to something bad. I told my friend Mike about it. Mike works at the police station, helping with papers and stuff. He's not a cop, but he knows them. I showed him my list and said, "Karen's acting weird. What's she doing?" Mike looked at it and said, "This is big, Jake. She might be stealing. I'll tell the cops." I gave him more proof, little things I found, like a receipt I saw in her trash once. It showed she'd taken money from the HOA. I even had a blurry photo from my phone, Karen sneaking a bag of cash into her car one night. Mike took it all and said, "We'll get her." Yesterday, Karen called 911 about Hopper. She stood in my yard, yelling that he was dangerous, and dialed the police right there. I didn't stop her. I let her do it. Then I called Mike and told him. He laughed and said, "Perfect timing. We've got enough on her now. The cops are ready." I didn't know exactly when they'd come, but I knew it was soon. And now, here they were, handcuffs on Karen, right in front of her house. Karen kept shrieking. "Let me go," she yelled. "This isn't fair." I didn't do anything. The tall cop held her arm tighter. "Ma'am, calm down," he said. "We've got proof. You've been taking money from the HOA, faking fines, keeping cash." Karen's eyes got wild. "No," she shouted. "That's a lie. Who told you that?" She looked at me, her face all twisted up. You did this, Jake." I didn't say anything at first. I just scratched Hopper's ears and watched her squirm. The bearded cop pulled out a paper from his pocket. "We've got receipts," he said. "Emails too. And people saw you. You've been scamming the neighborhood for months." Scamming means tricking people to take their money. Karen shook her head fast. No, no, no," she said. "That's not true. I'm innocent." But it was true. I'd seen it. The HOA collected money from everyone like a fee to fix the streets or plant flowers. Karen was supposed to use it for that. But she didn't. She made up fake fines telling people they owed money for silly things, like grass being too long or trash cans being out. Then she'd take that money and keep it for herself. She'd sneak it into her car at night, thinking no one noticed. But I did. And I told Mike. And Mike told the cops. The tall cop turned her around, pushing her toward the car. "Let's go," he said. Karen pulled back, her feet dragging. "Wait," she yelled. "You can't do this. I'm the HOA president. I'm important." But the cops didn't care. They opened the car door and helped her inside. She kept yelling, even as they shut it. "This is a mistake. You'll be sorry." Her voice was muffled now, but I could still hear her through the window. The neighbors were all outside now. They'd been peeking from their windows before, but now they stood on their lawns, watching with big eyes. Some of them whispered to each other. Some of them smiled, like they were glad. Karen had been mean to them too, writing notes, making rules, acting like she owned the street. Now they saw her in handcuffs, and they liked it. I stayed on my porch, calm and quiet. Hopper hopped over to me and sat by my chair. I reached down and patted his head. "Good job, buddy," I whispered. He didn't know what he'd done, but he'd helped. Karen called the cops on him, thinking she'd win. But that call made everything speed up. It made the cops come faster with all the proof Mike gave them. She thought she could bully me, scare me, make me lock Hopper up. But she was wrong. The only mistake was hers, thinking she could trick everyone and get away with it. The bearded cop got in the driver's seat. The tall cop walked around to the other side. They started the engine, and the car rumbled to life. Karen banged on the window with her cuffed hands. "Let me out," she shouted. "This isn't right." But the car started moving. It rolled down the street, slow at first, then faster. Everyone watched it go, me, the neighbors, even Hopper. Soon, it turned the corner and was gone. The street got quiet again. The sun was still shining, the birds were chirping, and Hopper was hopping. But Karen was gone. Her big secret was out. She wasn't just a nosy HOA lady. She was a thief, a liar who'd been caught. I'd been waiting for this, piecing it together, watching her every move. And now, the cops had her. She couldn't bully anyone anymore, not me, not Hopper, not the neighborhood. I leaned back in my chair, feeling good. The air felt lighter, like a big storm had passed. Karen thought she was so smart, so powerful. But she didn't see me coming. She didn't know I'd been watching, waiting, ready to turn her game around. And now, her perfect little world was falling apart right in front of everyone. The police car was parked right in front of Karen Miller's house. It was Sunday afternoon in Pinewood Hills, and things had just gotten crazy. The two cops had Karen in handcuffs. Her hands were locked together, and she wasn't happy about it. She'd been yelling and screaming, saying it was all a mistake. But the cops didn't listen. They led her to the car, one on each side, holding her arms so she couldn't run away. Her perfect curls, those big, bouncy curls she spent hours fixing, bounced up and down with every angry step she took. Her face was red, her eyes were wild, and she kept shouting, "Let me go. This isn't fair." I was still sitting on my porch across the street. My name's Jake Carter, and I'd been watching this whole thing unfold. My pet rabbit, Hopper, was with me. He's a little white bunny with floppy ears and a twitchy nose. He'd hopped over to me, sitting by my chair, totally clueless about what was happening. His fluffy fur brushed against my leg as he nibbled on some grass. I scratched his head and smiled. Karen was getting hauled away, and Hopper didn't even know he'd helped make it happen. The neighbors started peeking out. At first, they'd just been looking through their windows, moving curtains to see what was going on. But now, they stepped outside. Doors opened, and people came onto their lawns. Some stood with their arms crossed, watching. Others whispered to each other, their voices soft but excited. Then the whispers turned into cheers. "Yes," one lady shouted, clapping her hands. Finally, a man yelled, pumping his fist in the air. Turns out, I wasn't the only one Karen had ticked off. She'd been mean to lots of people, and they were happy to see her go. Karen heard the cheers and turned her head. "What are you looking at?" she snapped at the neighbors. "This is a mistake. You'll all be sorry." But no one cared what she said. The cops opened the car door, and she tried to pull away. "No," she yelled. "I'm not going." Her shoes scraped the ground, but the cops were stronger. They pushed her inside, gentle but firm. She sat in the back seat, her cuffed hands in her lap, still yelling through the window. "This isn't over. I'll be back." The tall cop shut the door with a loud thud. The bearded cop got in the front and started the car. The engine rumbled, and the tires rolled on the pavement. Everyone watched as the car moved down the street, slow at first, then faster. Karen's face was pressed against the glass, her mouth moving, but we couldn't hear her anymore. The car turned the corner and disappeared. She was gone. Just like that. The street got quiet again. The sun was still shining, the birds were chirping, and the air felt warm. Hopper hopped around my porch, his little feet thumping on the wood. I leaned back in my chair and took a deep breath. It felt good, like a big weight was off my shoulders. Karen had been a problem ever since I moved to Pinewood Hills. She was the HOA president, the lady who made rules for the neighborhood. She'd measure your grass with a ruler and write mean notes if it was too long. She'd knock on your door if your trash can was out late. And she hated Hopper. She'd yell at me all the time, saying he was ruining everything just by hopping in my yard. But now, she was gone. The cops had her because she'd been doing bad stuff, stealing money from the neighborhood. She'd been faking fines, telling people they owed cash for silly things, and keeping it for herself. I'd figured it out weeks ago. I'd seen her sneaky late-night visitors and heard her whispering about money on the phone. I told my friend Mike, who works at the police station, and he told the cops. They found proof, receipts, emails, even a blurry photo I took of her sneaking cash into her car. And today, they arrested her for fraud and theft. Justice was served, and it felt awesome. The neighbors didn't go back inside right away. They stayed outside, talking to each other. Some of them walked over to my yard. Jake, a lady named Mrs. Thompson, called. She lived 2 houses down. Did you see that? They got Karen. She was smiling big, her eyes all bright. I nodded. Yep, I said. She's gone now. Mrs. Thompson clapped her hands. Good riddance, she said. She was always so mean. Wrote me a note once because my flowers were too colorful. Can you believe that? A man named Mr. Gomez came over too. He had a little dog on a leash, and the dog barked at Hopper. Karen fined me for parking my truck on the street, he said. Said it wasn't allowed. I paid her $50. He shook his head. Guess she kept that money, huh? I smiled. Looks like it, I said. More neighbors came, telling stories about Karen. She'd fined one guy for having a basketball hoop. She'd yelled at a lady for planting a tree. Everyone had something to say, and they were all happy she was in trouble. Hopper hopped over to the edge of the porch, sniffing the air. I watched him and thought about how this all started. Karen had called 911 yesterday, saying Hopper was a dangerous animal. She stood in my yard, dialed the police, and yelled about how he was ruining the neighborhood. I let her do it, I didn't stop her. Then I called Mike and told him. He said the cops were already watching her for stealing, and her call about Hopper just made things move faster. Today, they showed up not for my bunny, but for her. And now, she was on her way to the police station, probably still yelling in the back of that car. Later that day, something big happened. The sun was starting to set, turning the sky orange and pink. I was inside, feeding Hopper some carrots, when my phone rang. It was Mrs. Thompson. Jake, she said, her voice all excited. We're having an emergency HOA meeting tonight. At my house. Can you come? I didn't know what it was about, but I said, sure, I'll be there. I gave Hopper an extra carrot, grabbed my jacket, and walked over to her place. Mrs. Thompson's house was full of people. Neighbors were sitting on chairs, the couch, even the floor. Everyone was talking, their voices loud and happy. When I walked in, they all looked at me. Jake. Mr. Gomez said, waving me over. Come sit down. I found a spot on the couch next to a lady with glasses. She smiled and said, we're so glad you're here. I smiled back, wondering what was going on. Mrs. Thompson stood up in front of everyone. She clapped her hands to get them quiet. Okay, listen up, she said. Karen's gone. The cops took her away, and she's not coming back anytime soon. We need a new HOA president, someone to make rules and keep things nice. But not like her. Someone good. The neighbors nodded, saying, yeah, and right. Mrs. Thompson looked at me and smiled. We talked about it, she said, and we want Jake Carter to be the new president. What do you say, Jake? Me? The HOA president? I blinked, surprised. Me? I said, pointing at myself. Everyone laughed a little. Yes, you. Mr. Gomez said. You stood up to Karen. You helped get rid of her. The lady with glasses nodded. We need someone fair, she said. Someone who won't yell at us for silly things. You're perfect. The room got loud again, people clapping, cheering, saying my name. Jake. 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 I thought about it for a second. Karen had made crazy rules: no rabbits, no tall grass, no fun. She'd bossed everyone around with her clipboard, acting like a dictator. A dictator's someone who tells people what to do and doesn't care what they think. I didn't want that. I wanted Pinewood Hills to be a happy place, a place where Hopper could hop, where people could live without being scared of mean notes. So I stood up and said, "Okay, I'll do it." The room exploded with cheers. People clapped me on the back, shook my hand, said, "Good job, Jake." Mrs. Thompson hugged me and said, "You're gonna be great." I smiled big this time, a real grin. "Thanks," I said. "I promise no crazy rules. Just a nice neighborhood for everyone." They cheered again, and someone brought out cookies. We ate and talked, and it felt like a party. After the meeting, I walked home. The stars were out now, twinkling in the dark sky. Hopper was waiting for me on the porch, his little eyes shining. I sat down next to him and said, "Guess what, buddy? I'm the new HOA president." He twitched his nose, like he didn't care, but I knew he was happy too. I promised him right then no more rules against hopping. He could bounce around all he wanted, and no one would stop him. Days went by, and things got even better. The police kept Karen at the station. Mike called me and said, "She's facing jail time, Jake. They've got tons of proof: stealing money, lying, all of it. She might be gone for years. Jail time means she'd be locked up, away from Pinewood Hills." I said, "Good. She deserves it." Mike laughed. "You bet she does. You did awesome, tipping us off." I smiled. "Thanks, Mike. Couldn't have done it without you." Then, one morning, I saw something cool. A big sign went up in front of Karen's house, her fancy house with its perfect lawn and big windows. The sign said, "For sale." That meant she wasn't coming back. She'd lost her home, just like she'd lost her power. Someone else would move in, someone nice, I hoped. I stood on my porch, watching the sign go up, and felt proud. Couldn't have happened to a nicer lady, right? Karen thought she could bully everyone forever, but she was wrong. The neighborhood changed fast. With me as HOA president, I kept my promise. No more crazy rules. People could have tall grass if they wanted. They could leave their trash cans out. They could have rabbits or dogs or whatever pets they liked. I didn't carry a clipboard or write mean notes. I just walked around, said hi to people, and made sure everyone was happy. If something needed fixing, like a broken streetlight, I used the HOA money for that, not for myself. The neighbors loved it. Mrs. Thompson planted more colorful flowers, and no one complained. Mr. Gomez parked his truck wherever he wanted. Kids played basketball in their driveways, and dogs barked without getting fined. Hopper hopped in my yard every day, and people stopped by to say, "He's so cute." It was like Pinewood Hills woke up like it was free for the first time in forever. One day, I got a letter. It was from the police. It said Karen's case was done. She'd been found guilty. Guilty means she did the bad stuff and had to pay for it. She got 5 years in jail for fraud and theft. 5 whole years. She wouldn't be back anytime soon. The letter also said they'd taken her money, the cash she stole, and given it back to the HOA. That meant we had extra money now, and I could use it to make the neighborhood even better. I called another meeting that night. Everyone came to Mrs. Thompson's house again. I stood up and said, "Karen's in jail for 5 years. And we got the money she stole back." The room cheered loud, so loud I had to wait for them to stop. "What should we do with it?" I asked. People shouted ideas. "Fix the playground," one said. "Plant more trees," another yelled. "Make a picnic spot," said Mr. Gomez. I wrote it all down and said, "Let's vote on it next time. We'll make this place awesome together." They clapped again, and we ate more cookies. Weeks turned into months, and Pinewood Hills kept getting happier. The playground got new swings. We planted trees along the street. We even made a little park with benches and a picnic table. People started smiling more, talking more, being friends. No one missed Karen, not one bit. Her house sold to a nice family with 2 kids and a dog. They waved at me when they moved in, and I waved back. "Welcome," I said. They seemed happy to be here, and I was happy to have them. Every day, I'd sit on my porch with Hopper. He'd hop around, chasing butterflies or nibbling clover. I'd sip lemonade or orange juice and watch the neighborhood. It was peaceful now, no yelling, no mean notes, no clipboard dictators. Just people living their lives, free and happy. I'd think about Karen sometimes sitting in jail, her curls probably flat now, her fancy life gone. She'd try to bully me, scare me, take Hopper away. But she lost. Justice was served, and it felt so good. One afternoon, Mrs. Thompson came over. "Jake," she said, "you're the best HOA president we've ever had." "Thank you." I smiled. "Thanks," I said. "I just want everyone to be happy." She nodded. "We are. Because of you." She gave me a plate of cookies and walked away. I shared one with Hopper, well, a tiny piece, since rabbits don't eat cookies. He twitched his nose, and I laughed. Karen was gone. Her rules were gone. Her stealing was gone. And Pinewood Hills? It was better than ever. I'd made it happen with a little help from Hopper and Mike. She thought she could push everyone around and get away with it, but she couldn't. Not anymore. The neighborhood was ours now, and we were keeping it that way. Hey there, friends. We've been on a wild ride, haven't we? My name's Jake Carter, and I've been telling you all about what happened in Pinewood Hills. It's a little neighborhood where I live with my pet rabbit, Hopper. He's a fluffy white bunny with big ears that flop when he hops. This story had everything: a mean lady named Karen, some sneaky secrets, and even cops showing up. Now that it's over, I want to sit back with you and talk about what it all means. So grab a snack, get comfy, and let's think about it together. So, here's the thing, friends, sometimes the people who act the loudest have the most to hide. That's what I learned from Karen Miller. She was the HOA president in Pinewood Hills. HOA means Homeowners Association. It's a group that makes rules for the neighborhood, like how tall your grass can be or where you can park your bike. Karen loved being in charge. She'd walk around with a clipboard, yelling at people, telling them what to do. She'd measure your grass with a ruler and leave mean notes if it was too long. She'd knock on your door if your trash can was out late. And she really didn't like Hopper hopping in my yard. Karen was loud, super loud. She'd stand in my yard and shout, "That rabbit's ruining everything." She'd wave her arms and stomp her feet, acting like she was the boss of the whole world. Everyone was scared of her. They'd tiptoe around, trying not to make her mad. If she said your flowers were too bright, you'd change them. If she said your dog barked too much, you'd keep it inside. She acted like she was perfect, like she never did anything wrong. But here's the big secret: she wasn't perfect. Not even close. See, while Karen was yelling at everyone, she was hiding something. She was stealing money from the neighborhood. The HOA collected cash from all of us like a fee to fix the streets or plant trees. Karen was supposed to use it for that, but she didn't. She made up fake fines telling people they owed money for silly things, like grass being too long or trash cans being out. Then she'd take that money and keep it for herself. She'd sneak it into her car at night, thinking no one saw. But I did. I watched her for weeks, saw the cars that came late, heard her whisper on the phone about money. She was loud on the outside, but sneaky on the inside. Karen thought she could push me around. She'd come to my house all the time, yelling about Hopper. "Lock him up," she'd say. "He's a nuisance." A nuisance means something annoying, but Hopper wasn't annoying to me. He was my buddy. I'd sit on my porch, sipping lemonade, watching him hop around my tiny yard. His ears would flop, his nose would twitch, and he'd chase butterflies like it was the best game ever. I'd tell Karen, "He's just a bunny. Relax." But she wouldn't relax. She'd get madder and madder, her face turning red like a tomato. One day, she went too far. She called 911, yep, the real police, and said Hopper was a dangerous animal. Can you believe that? A rabbit, dangerous. It was so silly I almost laughed. She stood in my yard, dialed the phone, and shouted about how Hopper was ruining Pinewood Hills. She thought she'd scare me, make me lock him up. She thought she'd win. But she didn't see me coming. She didn't know I'd been watching her, figuring out her secrets. She didn't know I'd told my friend Mike, who works at the police station, all about her sneaky stuff. The next day, the cops showed up but not for Hopper. They came for Karen. They put handcuffs on her and said, "You're under arrest for fraud and theft." Fraud means lying to trick people, and theft means stealing. They had proof receipts, emails, even a blurry photo I took of her with the money. Karen screamed, "This is a mistake." But it wasn't a mistake. It was justice. She'd been pushing everyone around, thinking she'd get away with it. But the loudest people? Sometimes they're hiding the most. And Karen's secrets came out big time. Now, Hopper. He's still hopping, living his best bunny life. After the cops took Karen away, I sat on my porch with him. The sun was shining, the air was warm, and he bounced around like nothing had happened. His little feet thumped on the grass, and his ears flopped with every jump. I gave him a carrot, and he nibbled it, happy as can be. Karen was gone, but Hopper was still here, free to hop wherever he wanted. That made me smile. She'd tried to stop him, but she couldn't. He was too fast, too cute, too awesome. The neighborhood changed after that. With Karen gone, the HOA had an emergency meeting. Guess who they picked as the new president? Me. Yep, Jake Carter, the guy with the rabbit. I promised no more crazy rules, just a place where people could live happy and free. No more measuring grass, no more mean notes, no more yelling about bunnies. Everyone cheered, and we made Pinewood Hills better. Karen. She's in jail now, 5 years for stealing. Her fancy house is sold, and she's not coming back. She thought she was the boss, but she lost everything. So here's what I want you to think about, friends. Next time someone tries to ruin your day over something small, just smile. Maybe they're loud because they're hiding something like Karen was. Maybe they're trying to push you around because they're scared you'll figure them out. Don't let them win. Keep doing your thing, like Hopper kept hopping. You never know when the tables might turn, when things might flip around and surprise them. Let's think about that for a minute. Have you ever met someone like Karen? Someone who's loud and bossy, always telling you what to do? Maybe a kid at school who yells a lot, or a grown-up who acts like they're better than everyone. They might seem big and tough, but sometimes they're just covering up something, like a secret they don't want you to know. Karen was like that. She yelled at me about Hopper, but really, she was scared I'd find out she was stealing. She acted loud to hide her sneaky side. But I didn't give up. I watched, I waited, and I told Mike. And in the end, she didn't win, I did. That's the cool thing about life, friends. You don't have to be the loudest to be strong. You don't have to yell or push people around. You can be quiet, like me sitting on my porch, and still make a difference. I didn't fight Karen with shouting or mean words. I just paid attention. I saw what she was doing, and I told the right people. Hopper didn't fight either, he just kept hopping, being his happy self. And together, we turned everything around. What if Karen had been nice instead? What if she'd said, "Hey, Jake, I like your rabbit," instead of yelling? Maybe things would have been different. Maybe she wouldn't be in jail now. But she chose to be loud and mean, and it caught up with her. That's a lesson for all of us. Being kind is better than being bossy. Helping people is better than hiding secrets. And sometimes, the quiet ones like me and Hopper end up on top. So next time someone's mean to you over something small, like your shoes being untied or your lunch being different, just smile. Don't let it get you down. Keep being you, like Hopper kept being a bunny. Maybe they're loud because they're scared. Maybe they're hiding something, like Karen was. And maybe, just maybe, the tables will turn. One day, they might trip over their own tricks, and you'll be the one smiling at the end. Let's talk about Hopper for a second. He's my best buddy, and he didn't even know he was part of this big story. When Karen yelled at him, he didn't stop hopping. When she called the cops, he didn't hide. He just kept doing his thing, bouncing around, nibbling clover, chasing butterflies. That's what I love about him. He's small, he's quiet, but he's tough in his own way. He didn't let Karen ruin his day, and neither did I. We kept going, and we came out okay, better than okay. Pinewood Hills is different now. It's a happy place. Kids play outside, dogs bark, Flowers grow big and bright. No one's scared of mean notes or fake fines. I'm the HOA president, and I make sure it stays nice, not with rules, but with kindness. Hopper hops every day, and people wave at him instead of yelling. Karen's gone, and her loud voice is just a memory. We turned the tables on her, and it feels so good. What do you think, friends? Did Karen get what she deserved? I think she did. She stole, she lied, she pushed people around. Now she's in jail, and we're free. Drop your answer in the comments below. I want to hear what you say. Tell me if you think she should have gotten in more trouble or less. And while you're at it, let me know if you'd watch more stories like this. I've got lots of tales, some with rabbits, some with other fun stuff. If you like this one, say, yes, Jake, tell us more. I'll see you in the next one, okay? Before I go, here's one last thing to think about. Life's like a big game sometimes. People might try to boss you, scare you, make you feel small. But you don't have to play their way. Be like Hopper, keep hopping, keep smiling, keep being you. Or be like me, watch, wait, and find the truth. The loud ones might seem big, but they don't always win. Sometimes, the quiet ones turn the tables, and that's the best surprise of all. So smile, friends. Live your best life, like Hopper's living his best bunny life. The world's full of Karens, but it's full of Jakes and Hoppers too. And when the tables turn, when justice comes and secrets spill out, you'll be glad you stayed strong. See you next time.